So yeah, if not Stafford, I would love to see Aaron Rodgers with the Rams.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast. I am your host, Dave Helman, coming to you from a hotel room in Indianapolis, Indiana. Yes, it's that time of the year. For 1 week in February, the entire NFL world centers around Indianapolis and the NFL Combine. Think of it as the stage setter for your NFL offseason. Obviously, the 2025 NFL Draft in Green Bay, still months away. Free agency opens in the middle of March, still some time before all of the real moves of your 2025 NFL offseason happen. But this is where those moves start to come into focus. This is where all of the coaches, scouts, personnel executive, and obviously this year's incoming 2025 NFL draft prospects, this is where they all gather. And yes, the on-field drills that'll happen later this week at Lucas Oil Stadium, that's what you'll see on TV. That's what will be on all the B-roll highlight footage that you watch on television. But the real work of the NFL Combine, interviews and medical evaluations of these prospects. This is where teams really find out the nitty-gritty about the incoming rookies. But on top of that, this is where everyone finds conference rooms, coffee shops, bars, dimly lit steakhouses to get together with agents, executives, you name it, to really work through what is going to happen in the coming weeks, discuss players' markets, who might get paid at the top of their position when free agency does open, who might be on the table for a trade. Literally, as we got ready to record this episode, word came down that the Washington Commanders granted veteran defensive tackle Jonathan Allen permission to seek a trade. Obviously, we've heard so much this week about Matthew Stafford being allowed to inquire with other teams about his market to see if he is being paid adequately. We will get into the Matthew Stafford topic later in the show. That deserves fleshing out all on its own. But the number one thing I would want people to take away from the NFL Combine is that these are where the conversations happen that lead to the moves that shape the upcoming season. This is where teams, agents, players start to get an idea of what might happen when negotiating opens in March and when all of this fun stuff can start to happen. And it's at a breakneck pace as well. Every NFL head coach is going to talk publicly this week. General managers are probably going to talk multiple times. Typically, you'll see them do it in an official capacity at a podium, and then you'll see them do a separate availability for their local media where they really get into the finer details with the writers and the reporters that they've known for a lot longer. It's a story a minute because, again, I think even since we started recording this, you've seen Kansas City general manager Brett Veach also say he anticipates that Travis Kelce will return for the 2025 season. Obviously, so much speculation about his future after the Chiefs Super Bowl loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see when or whether Travis addresses that. Brett Veach, the official quote, fired up about returning. See where that goes from here. That's my other favorite thing about the Combine is you'll often see stories that get spun immediately when somebody else has a chance to comment on it. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Travis Kelce has a comment about that, maybe on his podcast in the coming days once he hears what his general manager had to say. There's always something going on. There's always somebody stopping you to chat, to see what you think about things, to see how you feel about the draft class. It is a high energy week. We're excited to dive into it. And I'm going to do it with a little bit of help. Our good buddy, Ben Arthur of foxsports.com, also here in Indianapolis. He had a chance to sit down with me to get into the big storylines of the early part of the week. Because again, there's so much more to come. The player workouts don't even start until Thursday. So much more coming out of that and into the weekend. We will address that as we get later in the week. But as for right now, Ben and I set the stage, if you will, with some of the dominant talking points here in the first few days of the combine. Let's get into it. Joined now by my buddy Ben Arthur of FoxSports.com. And Ben, I really love this because we're usually remote from across the country. And right now, I think we're remote from about 3 blocks away. So like I got the Marriott Starbucks covered, and you've got the convention center covered. So I feel like we're playing good zone defense here on the NFL Combine 2025. I see that you're right outside the press room over at the convention center. So let's get this thing kicked off with just what you're hearing, what you're seeing, maybe the best tidbit you've picked up early on in Combine week.
Yeah, I think early on, probably the biggest thing I heard was just how the Titans talked about Travis Hunter. And there's been this whole debate, like, can he actually play both ways in the NFL? Oh, he might just be able to play corner, maybe a few packages here and there on offense, but maybe just predominantly on defense. But the way Titans coach Brian Callahan and general manager Mike Borgonzi spoke about him, that they seemed very confident that he could play significantly on both sides of the ball in his NFL career. I mean, I think with Callahan in particular, he said, of course, yeah, corner is going to be where he should start, but just projecting him out, that they really feel good about his ability to play a lot on both offense and defense. And so, yeah, that really jumped out to me just because of the just dialogue around him, what he can and maybe can't do at the NFL level. And then when I know earlier on in the offseason, when the Titans were kind of talking about their thought process with the number 1 pick and saying how they wouldn't pass on a generational talent, that was kind of like the soundbite of the quote that people ran with when they start talking about Travis Hunter and him being able to do everything. That connection kind of jumped out to me. I mean, obviously, we don't want to read too much into things, especially at this phase in the process. But yeah, I think the way the Titans spoke about Travis Hunter certainly jumped out to me at this point.
I don't want to use the word interesting because we don't have the top end quarterback talent in this class that really drives interest, but I do think the Titans find themselves in one of the more unique situations we've had in a while. Because you go back over the last couple of years, I mean, Caleb Williams was a no-brainer, and even behind him, you had Jaden Daniels. The year before that, it was a choice between Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. And you even go back to 2022, the last time we didn't really have a great quarterback class. It was pretty obvious pretty early on that we weren't going to have a quarterback go number 1 overall. Here in 2025, there's half a dozen different ways the Titans could do this, right? Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they fall in love with Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Travis Hunter, I mean, yeah, you talk about a generational talent. I think a guy that can play both sides of the ball fits that bill. I heard earlier today on Tuesday, the Titans see him primarily as a corner, while the Cleveland Browns, who pick number 2 overall, see him primarily as a wide receiver. I am fascinated by the idea that teams picking at the top of the board see this guy in very different ways. So maybe it's not as interesting because there's not the quarterback talent driving it, but it feels more unpredictable than it has in quite a few years.
It definitely does. And because it's not so set in stone that the teams with the top 2 picks are going to take quarterbacks too, right? I think that adds even more intrigue to the whole Travis Hunter dialogue, or even Abdul Carter out of Penn State. I mean, the Titans, as we discussed, I mean, they have so many needs beyond quarterback that no one is discounting the possibility that they trade out, build up the roster around maybe a veteran quarterback. And then with the Browns, we all know their Deshaun Watson situation, but it's no slam dunk that they take a quarterback either. And so I think, as you said, even though this isn't a strong quarterback class or the way it's perceived, I think just because the 2 teams that you think would want to get the two, the top two guys in a weak class may not even want them or truly pursue them. I think that adds an interesting wrinkle to kind of this whole discourse.
Speaking of interesting wrinkles, we're gonna call this synergy, Ben. I love the way when a plan comes together, because one of the early storylines is about one of those quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders. It was revealed earlier this week, not going to take part in on-field drills, not going to do a workout here when the player workouts get started at Lucas Oil Stadium. And that lines up perfectly with a story you wrote this week about Shedeur and his process. You got to spend time around him and his crew at the Shrine Bowl down in the Dallas area last month. And I'm curious for your perspective on that, because look, my take and my take only, this feels like a huge non-story at this point to me. I think it's very normal to hear that guys are going to do their own thing. Last year, Marvin Harrison Jr. very famously just opted out of the draft process altogether. So I have a hard time mustering up much interest in this, but it is Shedeur Sanders. It is the son of Deion Sanders. We know that this is a very polarizing topic. Having spent time around him and his people, what do you make of this, and where do you see the story going from here?
Yeah, I think you hit it right there, right? I think because it is Shedeur Sanders and the brand around him and his father and prime time and kind of how they move differently, right? And the brand that they've put out there. I think just the fact that he didn't do anything at the Shrine Bowl and now he's not going to throw in front of scouts and personnel folks at the combine. I think it just adds to the narrative that people already had that, oh, he's just kind of in his own world or whatever. But none of this has to do with his actual ability when the lights are on, when he's between the lines. I mean, we all saw what he did at Colorado. He's a hell of a talent. We've talked about the accuracy, timing, ball placement, all those skills. And then you mentioned the story I wrote too. Like the biggest sense I got and I tried to paint a scene of that brand that we talk about, right? That there's this heavy, strong emphasis on the brand around him. But when it comes to football, like he does not play. And the fact that even that has to be put out there is something in itself. But how seriously he takes the game is not. He doesn't take the game lightly at all. Like he has, just from those talking to those around him, he has those franchise quarterback traits. And like you said, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't do anything in the draft process. Caleb Williams, I don't remember him throwing at the combine. Jaden Daniels, I don't remember him throwing at the combine. Like this isn't news, right? But again, because this is Shedeur Sanders, because he is primetime son, there is already a built-in narrative about him and how he moves and people not liking the flash and the glitz and the glam or whatever, however you want to talk about it. And so I think it's just more ammo for people, and it really doesn't have anything to do with his game. It's really ridiculous, but that's the way it is.
You know what's crazy too? I've been thinking about this since this news came out. And again, it's very unsurprising news. Like you just brought it up with last year's prospects. Like it's pretty normal to see guys who are confident in their draft range call their own shots. You know, like if you're confident you're going to be a first round pick or a top 15 pick or a top 10 pick, whatever, you have in this day and age, you have the autonomy to call your own shots. And Ben, I don't really think that bothers anybody in the actual league. You know, we've got a pretty long track record at this point of players handling their draft processes differently, calling their own shots, working out when they want to, going on the visits that they want to do. And I think by and large, teams have adapted to that. Like maybe privately they don't love it,
Yeah.
but you're not hearing NFL teams ding these guys. I mean, Marv Jr. went 4th overall after all of that. You go back to the year of all the COVID opt-outs. You know, name the player: Jamar Chase, Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater. Like all of those guys opted out of entire seasons, and it had zero effect on where the league drafted them, and what the league thought of them. And the irony is that we're talking about this on a podcast, I understand, but it's all for you and me. It's for you and me and for the fans. I don't think anybody of consequence inside the league gives a damn about this.
Yeah, and we have to like remind ourselves that like events like the combine or these pro days or whatever it is, like these aren't like actual football settings. Like these teams are looking at the actual tape, the stuff that matters, all of this stuff that we've been spoiled to, right, as media or fans of the game of football, and wanting to see guys go out and do the 40. Like all of that is just kind of, it's all, I don't know the correct word to use for, but it's kind of like a nice way to kind of dress everything up, right? For us to be entertained, like you said, and I know for a fact, like privately, some teams would like to see some of these guys do these things, but I mean, at the end of the day, it is a new era, and again, like it's not actual football. Like some of this stuff that we see, like what it's really about is the teams getting to see getting to get their hands on these guys and do the medical tests and uh, going over the tape and getting to know who these people are, and not necessarily how far of a ball like a quarterback can throw, or how fast a receiver, like can he hit 4.4 in the 40 yard. It's really not about that. And I think we as a media, as fans, we put a little too much emphasis on that when we see all the time guys who don't even test that well end up being all pro Hall of Fame type talent. Like it really, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that deep, in my opinion.
I think we're slowly catching up to that. But I mean, the combine is the combine. It's, we've turned it into this week-long extravaganza.
Spectacle.
Yeah, it's gonna stay on national TV. So I don't see that changing, but I'd like to think people who are paying attention have slotted it appropriately in terms of like what matters during the course of an NFL offseason. I'm curious for your take on this though. Okay, I've said all that nice stuff about Shedeur. I don't care if he doesn't work out. I don't care if I don't see him throw a football until July. But I am curious, do you think this level of scrutiny and the publicity and the polarization that goes along with being Shedeur Sanders, with being the son of Prime, do you think that factors into teams' evaluations? Because that will be a heightened level of scrutiny with whatever team drafts Shedeur Sanders. I lean toward thinking no. Like if a team thinks you can play, they're going to take on whatever perceived headache they think might come with it. But I do wonder how hard teams might weigh that, because I do think this is an extra level of scrutiny that will come with a player like Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, I think with Shedeur, like he's going to bring people to the seats, right? First and foremost, like it's a show, wherever you kind of fall in terms of the polarization scale, like at the end of the day, there's attention that brings eyeballs, that's ticket sales, that's all those things. And so I think if you pair that with what we've seen him do, like on the field, like, and I noted this in the story that I wrote as well, just how elite he was in clutch situations, whether it was 2 minute or third down or end of game. Like he did all those quarterbacky things in those type of moments. And then we have to remember too, like this has been Shedeur Sanders' whole life. And so if you're thinking about how it affects the player, it doesn't affect him because this has been his whole life. He's used to always having the spotlight on him. He's used to always having the pressure on him. And so at the end of the day, all the bells and the whistles, the hoopla, like it's about like football at the end of the day. Like, are you able to give fans a product that they want? And is the player themselves maybe unaffected by maybe all that hoopla? And I think Shedeur Sanders can check all those boxes because he has been in the limelight and he has shown that despite the limelight, he's been able to deliver with all that. I guess it's just a matter of like, does the team want to deal with all the extra stuff? And I think if you're getting the play out of the quarterback, and you're getting the engagement from the fan base or whatever, I think you can put up with that if you're a team. That's what I think.
I think you're absolutely right. Please make sure you go give Ben's story a read, foxsports.com and the Fox Sports app. Really interesting insight into the process behind Shedeur Sanders. And I think the side of it that gets lost in the Instagram comment arguments about his level of play. Let's switch over. All right, Shedeur, obviously in joining the league here in the coming months. Let's talk about one of the most established quarterbacks in the NFL, a former number 1 overall pick, and that would be Matthew Stafford, who I think is probably the most interesting news item at this NFL Combine, for simple virtue of the fact that one of the best quarterbacks in the league has an uncertain future, because Matthew told us here on the NFL on Fox podcast at the Super Bowl that he wants to keep playing, but there seems to be at least some doubt that that is with the LA Rams in 2025. It doesn't sound like they want to restructure his contract, but he does want a pay raise after the last couple of years. How much do you buy into this, Ben? I'll jump right out in front of it and say, at the end of the day, I have a hard time believing that the Rams move on from Matthew Stafford, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that as well. I think what the Rams have given his agent permission to do in terms of kind of talk with other teams and engage what the actual market is for him, I think that does both sides a service in terms of math, in terms of Stafford, like what actually is kind of the demand, and in terms of salary, like for a player of his status and ability still at this point in his career, and for the Rams, like, are they maybe underplaying just maybe how valuable the market is for him right now? So I think, long story short, I think this does both sides a service, but I don't think, like you said, I find it very hard to believe that the Rams will move on from him. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, they're just 1 to 2 plays away, essentially, from going to the NFC title game. I mean, they were right there. He is getting older, of course, but he's still an elite caliber quarterback. And I think these decides they find a solution at some point. And look, I think there's going to be, there's obviously going to be demand. Like, I could see the Giants or even the Steelers. Actually just wrote a Steelers story. I think those are 2 teams that could be heavily interested in him, but I find it very hard to believe that the Rams will actually go through with this and let like a trade happen. I think more of this is just so they know, okay, kind of what his market is, and they could maybe compensate him in accordance to kind of what other teams are saying.
Okay, I agree with you. And you're so right. Like, let Stafford get a gauge on how much he could reasonably ask for. Again, it's hard to imagine a team that gives Stafford a better chance than the one that just made an impressive playoff run last year. And on the other side of this too, it's hard to imagine the Rams realistically finding an upgraded quarterback from Matthew Stafford.
Yeah.
Having said all of that boring, responsible stuff, it is more fun to speculate. So let's just game this out. You mentioned the Giants and the Steelers. Those are 2 that make a hell of a lot of sense. Like, how do you feel about those fits? Or is there somebody we're not thinking about that could be a potential landing spot for Matthew Stafford?
Well, I mean, I bring up the Giants. I mean, they're so desperate, and we heard John Mara's comments earlier this offseason about how his patience is wearing thin. I mean, Dayball and Shane, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them. And even with the number 3 overall pick, I mean, they need to win now. And so I can really see that happening. The Steelers are a team that has been kind of stuck in this range of above average, but not elite for so long now. I mean, Mike Tomlin has lost 6 straight playoff games. They need to figure out a way to get over the hump. And so those are two teams that make a lot of sense for me. I'm trying to think of who else um, makes sense. I mean, a dark horse could be the Titans. We talked about the Titans maybe not using the number one pick on a quarterback, and Brian Callahan worked with Stafford in Detroit several years ago. So that's something I think we should watch that as well as we kind of maybe look at Titans, their options in terms of the veteran quarterback market. Um, I would say those would be my top three.
That's a really interesting idea because again, with all due respect to Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, I'm sure the Titans wish they had the number one overall pick in either of the last 2 years instead of this draft. And so maybe, I think when you have the number one overall pick, the ideal is to start a new era of your franchise with a number one overall pick quarterback. But I could think of worse things than 2 or 3 years of Matthew Stafford, and maybe you take Travis Hunter and you build the team around him, and that at least gives you a bit of an exit ramp to try to figure out the future of the position while also being competitive in what I think you'd have to call a very winnable division if you had a quarterback like Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, I mean the AFC South is pretty much up for grabs every year, and yeah, the Titans are at a point. I mean, they have so many holes that like if they trade back from number one and slide back maybe a few spots, they can still get all that capital, draft capital they need to build up the team, but maybe still get like a blue chip guy like a Travis Hunter, and then get your kind of short term bridge quarterback and a guy that Brian Callahan is very familiar with and who can give you maybe 2 good years. And I mentioned that uh, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are under a lot of pressure in New York, but Brian Callahan is feeling it too. I mean, he's coming off of just his first year as coach, but going 3-14 and with the way the Titans have kind of fallen off a cliff the last couple years, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them to win too. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And um, yeah, I think the Titans. I mean, the Titans control the draft, right? And I think
Okay.
they have they have pretty much all options are on the table for them. So it's going to be fun to see kind of what they decide to do with that.
It's funny because I can squint and see a world where the Titans are pretty competitive. I think you add Matthew Stafford to the New York Giants. I think the Giants are a lot closer to being a respectable team than people would probably guess based on the way
Mhm.
they played last year. Having said all of that, though, is a 37-year-old quarterback with a history of getting the crap beat out of him like Matthew Stafford gonna sign up for that over a Rams team that was very, very close to the NFC Championship? It's hard for me to picture that when you consider Stafford maybe has 3 years left at most, maybe even less than that.
Yeah, and I'd agree, but then also it kind of all depends on what's the conversations going on behind the scenes, right? Like if Stafford feels like he's so so significantly underpaid that he feels kind of this has feels some type of way about the Rams after kind of what he's done for them. I mean, it could be a situation to where he feels like he just wants it to get out to where he'd be compensated uh, to where he feels like to what he feels like he deserves, even if it makes all the sense in the world for him to stay, like from a football standpoint and probably for a life standpoint at this point in his career. But um, it all kind of depends on like if I guess kind of if he gets what he wants financially from the Rams, and it's kind of hard to say at this point until we get a clearer picture of what exactly that market is for him.
Before we move on, my favorite wrinkle in all of this, as long as we're just speculating and not being boring, I do love the people who noticed that the LA Rams officially hired longtime offensive assistant Alex Van Pelt to their coaching staff this year. Alex Van Pelt, who is the BFF and former quarterbacks coach of Aaron Rodgers.
Mm,
So I'm just I'm just throwing that out there because I find it very interesting. And the one thing I got to say about this is if there's a team where you can't rule out them doing something very bold, it's Les Snead, Sean McVay, and the LA Rams. I mean, you can't take anything off the table with those guys if they think it's going to make them better in the long run.
Yeah, I think Stafford will. I'm still going to stay firm on this. I think Stafford will be the Rams guy in 2025. But if not, Aaron Rodgers certainly makes the most sense on paper, and an established Super Bowl winning quarterback like that, paired with that defense, and they have a great run game, and they have Puka, and we don't know Cooper Cup's future, but I mean they have a a very positive situation for someone like Aaron Rodgers to come in and be that guy for them in this little window they have with all that rookie contract talent they have. So yeah, if not Stafford, I would love to see Aaron Rodgers with the Rams. That would be
This is
fun.
the beauty of the combine, and it's why I love it so much every year because it's almost like somebody's just dumping a bunch of puzzle pieces out on the table, and we don't know what this puzzle is going to look like yet, but you're just sort of watching it all get moved into place. And we start putting it together here over the next, I mean, obviously in 3 weeks when free agency opens and then the draft. It's just, I love looking at all the different puzzle pieces and seeing, all right, how are we going to move all this into place? And I think Stafford right now for me is the biggest puzzle piece for this
Mhm.
entire NFL offseason. Let's talk about another big one. And I don't think it was a major surprise, but it is a significant development for America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. While we were on the pod hiatus after the Super Bowl, perennial All-Pro Zach Martin retired. Like I said, I don't think it's incredibly shocking. He's dealt with injuries on and off over the last couple years. This was year 11, I believe. He was drafted all the way back in 2014. Not a huge surprise, but it does add another need to the long list of things the Cowboys need to worry about. And looking at them drafting number 12 overall, it's not often they have a pick this high. And I do think it's an interesting wrinkle in terms of how they might address that, how it might affect what they do in the NFL draft. Obviously, people are going to be pairing them with Boise State running back Ashton Genty for the entire offseason. I wonder sort of how that news might change the way they approach this.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, right? Like I think with the way their team is set up, I mean, I could see them going after like a Trey Smith or something like that, a veteran guy to kind of shore up that offensive line, not just for whoever the running back is going to be, but for Dak, right? He's going to be uh, fully healthy coming into 2025. Didn't have a full year for his kind of first season of that record 60 million per year deal, and so um, I could see them going the veteran route to maybe address some of those holes and then maybe go best available at 12. I could see that. I could also see them maybe trading back because with a guard with the need for a guard, um, you're be a stretch to take one that high, right? I don't know who the highest rated guard off the top of my head is, but I think trading back or using kind of one of their later round picks to kind of address that. You could look at that as well, but I think it either if you don't go the veteran route, I really like the idea of trading back from 12 to build to get those draft picks, take the highest rated guard or whatever, and kind of go from there.
I'm with you in the sense, like I said, I don't think this is unexpected news in Dallas. I think if they weren't expecting it, they were at least braced for the possibility. I think Brock Hoffman played guard for them admirably when Zach was injured this year. They also drafted Cooper Beebe. I doubt they want
Mhm.
to move him out of the center job, but they theoretically could if they wanted to. Obviously, they have one of the best young guards in the league in Tyler Smith. So I don't think they need to panic and change their draft strategy here. I just wonder how it might fall for them. Again, Ashton Genty is a name that everybody's going to say. This team also needs help all over its defensive line. You're dealing with the potential absence of Trayvon Diggs because the injury he suffered at the end of the year is probably going to run into the 2025 season. There's very little in the way of depth at wide receiver behind CeeDee Lamb. So yeah, I'm with you, and I'm hoping the Cowboys are smart enough to not overreact to this news. Although I will say, if they were to go out and get Trey Smith, I think they're going to throw you a parade in Dallas, Ben, because it would be the antithesis of what the Dallas Cowboys like to do in free agency. And that's the other thing I wanted to touch on with you. The other big quote, coming out of the early part of this combine week is Stephen Jones it's already a famous catchphrase saying he wants the Cowboys to be selectively aggressive in free agency, which who the hell knows what that means. But after an offseason where they did next to nothing to improve their roster, it is at least interesting to think the Cowboys are eyeing the idea of some kind of aggressive improvement, which, yeah, I think Trey Smith would qualify, as would just about anyone compared to what they've done in recent years.
Yeah, and then you just look at what's happening across the NFC East too. I mean, they're certainly feeling the pressure. I mean, the Commanders went from like a bottom dweller to a game away from the Super Bowl when they got Jaden Daniels, and then Eagles, of course, winning the whole thing. I mean, and I know Micah Parsons has talked about this too. I mean, they need to they got to take that next step, and selective aggressiveness, whatever that means. If that means actually paying like a Trey Smith, or just being aggressive in that manner to get high quality players, like players of that stature, and maybe not just waiting to the second round of free agency, or yeah, I think that there's so many ways the Cowboys can attack it, but just with the way the Eagles and Commanders particularly are kind of ascending right now, they could kind of get lost. And so I think that's on their mind as well.
For me to take the Cowboys seriously, by this time next month, I need them to have added a starter caliber player at, we'll say, receiver, linebacker, defensive tackle, cornerback. Like, if I'm taking note, I don't need one at all four. I need a starter caliber player at like half of those positions. I need to be going into the draft with a lot of those problems settled, because if we're going to add a rookie running back, that's perfectly fine, but it can't come at the expense of not having a receiver behind CeeDee Lamb on the depth chart, or not having a proven defensive tackle, especially if Oso Odigizua leaves in free agency. I need some of these problems to be addressed in March, which just really hasn't been the case for a lot of the last decade of Cowboys off seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, with the way, I mean, just with Jerry Jones though, like it's so kind of hard to predict what's going to happen, right?
Tell me about it, brother. Yeah, it's the story of my life.
Like we can talk so much about what they should do, and what selective aggressiveness actually means, and kind of the paths of getting these starting caliber players. I mean, it's very clear, I think, in front some of these things that they need to do, but because of the way Jerry Jones operates, it's very hard to be confident in saying that they'll actually do those things. Like I just feel like when you started listing out all those things, I feel like the sense I was getting from you is that you don't believe it's going to happen. That's the way I interpreted what you said. So
100%. I if you want me to be blunt, I need to see it to believe it. I really don't care about what gets said here. I mean, it was Jerry Jones that famously said they were all in last year, and apparently all in meant letting CeeDee Lamb hold out of training camp and waiting until the day before the season, or like the day of the season, to sign Dak Prescott. So yeah, it's going to take action for me to think any of it means anything. Because what my guess would be is that selective aggression means the Cowboys are going to inquire about a few players and then get freaked out by the price tag and back off. Like that's what I expect to happen. But like I said, we will know. I think we'll know how serious they are because you're right. Obviously, the Eagles just won the Super Bowl. The Giants have a top 3 draft pick. The Commanders got to the NFC title game, and very quietly, they still have a ton of cap space to work
Mm-hmm.
with. Like it's not like they used it all last year. So the Commanders have all the room in the world to get even better than they already were. If the Cowboys don't do something significant in March, then I really think we can write them off as a team worth taking seriously in 2025 that quickly. I like that sounds dramatic, but I think it's true. There's just too many needs on this team to think you're going to get it all done with a draft class.
It feels like, Dave, we've gotten to a point to where, and you could probably speak to this better than me, but it feels like we've gotten to a point where the Cowboys fan base has like just had it with Jerry Jones. It feels like after all these years that this is almost kind of the tipping point. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but yeah, just with the, like you said, the all in comment, the the end result last year, um, what is going on for this year? I mean, there's still, I mean, Micah still hasn't been paid. Uh, all these different factors. It's hard to. Um, it just feels like there's more of a fed up type attitude with the Cowboys fan base than there has been in previous years.
So here's my take on that. And I think you're absolutely right. But what I will say is do not underestimate the power of the Cowboys star. There are so many fans of this team, and their reach is so broad that even if the diehards are mad and apathetic and frustrated, there are still that many more people that are going to tune in and support the team, and the ticket sales aren't going to suffer or any of that stuff.
Mm.
But what I will say is I think the Cowboys are flirting with apathy more than they have at any point in the last 30 years. And like
Yeah,
is that going to matter in 2025 or 2026? No. But if they don't get it pointed in the right direction relatively soon, I do think it could have very real consequences for them in the bigger picture. Not right now, but in the bigger picture for sure. And I mean, you look at especially the arrival of Jaden Daniels. I mean, I know we can't write the guy's career story right now, but if he makes Washington a relevant, viable franchise for the next decade or more, like we think he will, that stuff matters. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think they're panicking, but I do think it's something that they have to approach with very real concern in the big picture for sure.
hey man, we will see. I think it's really, yeah, and you bring up Jaden Daniels just with the Commanders and like all this space that they have, and I know we'll probably move on, but they have so much room for growth too, like on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like most of the year we spent talking about just how, even as they kind of went on their run, kind of how average that defense was, and they have the space to actually take substantial strides on that side of the ball. On top of course, continuing to build around Jaden Daniels on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, they could get a lot scarier moving forward, and that puts even more of an onus on the Cowboys too. But I think that's important to note as well.
I'll break it off here, but that actually that leads me to a point about the Cowboys as well, is that for all the frustration, there should be reason for optimism with the Cowboys. They employ one of the best pass rushers in football who is 25. They employ one of the best receivers in football who's 25. Dak Prescott, for all his flaws, is still one of the, he's a quality starting quarterback who's only 31 years old. You can obviously win with Dak Prescott. The foundation is there for a team that you should take seriously. It's just on them to follow through
Yeah.
with saying stuff like we're all in or we're going to be selectively aggressive. It's on them to do something with that. And I guess we'll see here over the next 3 or 4 weeks if this year's any different.
Yep. I agree. We'll have to
It's
see.
funny. We filled all that airspace and it's only been a day and a half at the NFL Combine. That's how quickly everything happens. So
It's crazy
I
when you put it
know
like that.
you're like 50 feet from the interview rooms where all the podiums are, and there's going to be a million more sound bites. So don't let us stop you. You go take care of that, and we will check in with you when all this is over. We'll have a combine wrap-up show coming at the end of the week to address anything that happens between now and then, which judging from experience, plenty more is going to happen. But Ben, in the meantime, man, I appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I will. Yeah, you know what? I'll see you soon because we're gonna go get a beer or something here when we're done working.
We have to. We're actually in the same city for once, so we have to make that happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm gonna come find you here in a little bit. But as always, man, I appreciate you hopping on.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you.
This episode of the NFL on Fox podcast is brought to you by Daiya Pizza, featuring dairy-free cheese made with the innovative Daiya Oat Cream Blend. Let's talk about game day snacks. Pizza is a must, but if you've ever doubted that a dairy-free option could match up, Daiya is here to change your mind. Thanks to their Daiya Oat Cream Blend, you can get all the creamy, melty goodness that stretches and melts just like dairy with a rich, savory taste that perfectly complements every bite without any of the dairy. Their thin, crispy crust is the foundation for bold, savory toppings, and the standout? Their cheese, made with Daiya Oat Cream Blend. It's rich, stretchy, and melts just like dairy cheese. So whether you're hosting a big watch party or keeping it low-key with family, Daiya makes it easy to enjoy dairy-free eating while delivering everything you love about pizza. No commitment to dairy-free eating is required. Daiya pizzas are designed for everyone to enjoy. Make your next pizza night or game day spread FOMO-free. That's fear of missing dairy. Visit DaiyaFoods.com to learn more or grab Daiya Pizza at major retailers like Whole Foods, Kroger, or Walmart. Check them out on Instagram or TikTok for even more inspiration.
Thanks again to Ben Arthur for hopping on. And like I said, we are not done with our combine coverage. We've got another show coming your way Friday to recap anything else that happens in Indianapolis. It's going to be interviews. There's going to be availability moving through the rest of the week. And like we said, there are still the on-field drills to get to. So we will be bringing all of that your way on Friday. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're not, go find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you prefer to get your pods. That'll be in the feed on Friday. You can find us on YouTube as well if you prefer that format. Point being, we'll be back with another Combine show on Friday. Until then, as always, I appreciate it. I'll talk to y'all soon.